Is Beyond Light worth it in 2023? We've got Lightfall now, and you may be wondering if there's a point to buying old DLC. There are a few compelling reasons why you might want to pick up Beyond Light. You'll get access to some great weapons, an excellent raid, and the Stasis Subclass. I don't think it is worth the full price of $29.99, but there are plenty of sales throughout the year where you can pick this up for cheap. As for what you get with this DLC, let's start by talking about the campaign. The Beyond Light campaign takes us to the frozen moon Europa in response to an invitation from the darkness we encountered at the end of Shadowkeep. While searching for answers, Varix the Loyal and the exo-stranger Elsie Bray reach out for assistance. A fallen leader named Aramis has obtained a splinter of the darkness and she's been using it to empower her followers with stasis abilities. We'll work with Varix to take out Aramis's commanders one by one, while Elsie will help guide us to understanding the darkness so that we can also wield stasis against our enemies. The campaign is a noticeable improvement over Shadowkeep. Beyond Light will take you longer to complete, and it doesn't end on a note that makes you think, wait, so that's it? My only complaint about the story is how we basically freeze the enemy and just walk away like the problem is solved. Obviously, this was setting up Aramis to return in the future. It just feels a bit too much like a 90s superhero cartoon. Other than that point, I did enjoy the campaign and story. It does suffer from the same issue as Shadowkeep of being too easy. Even on a brand new character, you'll have no trouble getting through the campaign. That is a big downside, but on the upside, you'll unlock the Stasis subclass sooner. I won't hold the difficulty against the campaign at this point. At least it gives new players a full campaign experience. Honestly, Bungie should just make Shadowkeep and Beyond Light free for everyone. They do sometimes have free-to-play weekends for the legacy campaigns, so if the only thing you care about with the DLC is the campaign, you may want to wait for one of those free weekends. Regardless, the Beyond Light campaign is a solid entry point for beginners. You'll gain access to 2 new strikes with Beyond Light, the Glassway and the Proving Grounds. All strikes are available to play in the Vanguard Ops playlist regardless of whether you own the corresponding DLC or not. The only thing you gain from owning the DLC is access to run the Nightfall version of the strike. Nightfalls are more difficult versions of strikes with better rewards. You'll have to deal with champions and a bunch of negative modifiers depending on the difficulty option you select. Since you can't run a Nightfall unless you own the corresponding DLC, you can get locked out of very rewarding content until the next reset. That can be really frustrating, especially if you're chasing the Grandmaster title and you have to wait until the next time a Nightfall you own enters the rotation. As for the strikes themselves, if you enjoy challenging in-game content, then you'll likely enjoy the Glassway Nightfall. This is easily one of the most difficult Nightfalls in the game. Running this thing on Grandmaster difficulty is brutal. The Proving Grounds is a bit more manageable, although the final boss room can be a pain. Beyond Light also added Empire Hunts. Empire Hunts are basically the same thing as strikes. It's the exact same formula of flying into an activity, running through mobs of enemies, then fighting a boss at the end. The only difference here is that Empire Hunts are Beyond Light themed and exist in a playlist separate from strikes. You'll actually have to run these at least once as part of the Beyond Light campaign. After that, you can select some difficulty options for better rewards. As far as I know, Empire Hunts are the only activity that will drop the Cloud Strike exotic sniper rifle. This is a random drop at the end of the hunt. Other than Cloud Strike, there isn't much reason to run these unless you are chasing the title. Beyond Light doesn't include a dungeon, but it does include the Deepstone Crypt raid. The DSC raid is a really good one. You'll start the raid on Europa and eventually make your way to a Braytech facility in orbit, then crash the aforementioned facility back into Europa. D1 veterans will recognize an old friend returning as the final boss. Sadly, Tenix finally found a house, and we crashed it into Europa. I really enjoy the environment of this raid. During one of the encounters, your team will need to travel back and forth between the orbiting facility and the facility on Europa. The first time I saw this mechanic, I thought it was one of the coolest things ever added to Destiny 2. This eventually leads to a jumping puzzle outside the facility, and I'm all about some space jumping. The jumping section is accompanied by the beautiful Deep Stone lullaby softly playing with a muffled tone to help sell your brain on the idea of being in the vacuum of space. If you don't believe me, just do a quick search for it on YouTube and see if it doesn't melt your tension away. Aside from the raid being fun, you'll have plenty of reasons to continue running it. There are some great weapons like the Heritage Shotgun and the Commemoration Machine Gun. Bungie even added patterns for these weapons to the raid, so you'll be able to craft the exact role that you want. On top of all that, there is a weekly rotating feature raid that will cause DSC to drop a pinnacle reward at completion when it is featured. There is an exotic tied to the raid named Eyes of Tomorrow. This rocket launcher will fire a volley of tracking rockets. Unfortunately, it is a random drop after completing the raid. On the bright side, this is a fun raid and that helps soften the blow a bit if you have really bad luck on the drop. All things considered, this is one of the best raids in Destiny 2 and it's pretty much the highlight of the Beyond Light DLC in my opinion. Beyond Light introduced a few new exotic weapons. Most of these are available for purchase from the exotic kiosk or from Xur. Let's start with what you can purchase at the kiosk. Duality is a solar shotgun that fires a pellet spread from the hip or a precision slug when aiming down sights. Tiku's Divination is one of my favorite bows. It fires tracking arrows from the hip which will prime the target. Aim down sights and hit the prime target and it will cause a solar explosion. Cryosthesia 77K is a stasis sidearm that can freeze a group of enemies with its alternate fire mode that becomes active after getting a kill. Lorentz Driver was a complete menace in Crucible when it first launched. This linear fusion rifle will create a black hole that sucks in surrounding enemies then detonates when you get precision final blows with it. Agar Scepter is a stasis trace rifle that will send out a slowing burst after getting a final blow on an enemy. Hitting enemies with multiple slowing bursts will cause them to freeze. To purchase any of the exotics from the kiosk, you'll need a lot of materials. Exotic ciphers can be earned by completing a weekly quest from Xur. Ascendant shards can be obtained from the season pass or for completing in-game activities like Nightfalls or Trials of Osiris. Glimmer and legendary shards just require grinding of any activity. Speaking of Xur, if you check in with them each week, you can purchase random rolls of Hawk Moon and Dead Man's Tale. Hawk Moon is a hand cannon you may remember from D1. Unlike in D1, the perk is no longer random. Each precision hit will grant a damage bonus to the final round in the magazine. Dead Man's Tale is one of the most fun to use scout rifles in the game. Lending precision hits grants bonus range and target acquisition. After completing the campaign, LC will award you with the No Time to Explain pulse rifle. This pulse rifle returns precision shots back to the magazine and will create a little attack buddy after 10 precision hits. There are 2 quest-related exotics for Beyond Light. Salvation's Grip is a stasis grenade launcher that can freeze enemies. You can also use it to create platforms. This one needs some attention from Bungie. The quest to obtain it begins after completing the campaign. The Lament is a powerful chainsaw-like sword that deals massive damage to enemies. It can also pierce the shield of barrier champions. The quest to obtain it can be picked up from Banshee. Finally, there are 2 exotics that will randomly drop from Beyond Light content. The Eyes of Tomorrow rocket launcher will randomly drop after completing the Deepstone Crypt raid. This rocket launcher can highlight targets when aiming down sights and then fire a volley of rockets that will track those highlighted targets. The Cloud Strike sniper rifle will randomly drop after completing Empire hunts. This sniper will generate a burst of lightning bolts in an area on precision final blows. When discussing exotic gear, I feel like I need to add a disclaimer. Bungie does occasionally change the way exotics are obtained. Sometimes those changes make the gear available to everyone, including people who don't own the expansion. Just be aware that is always a possibility. Last but not least, completing the Beyond Light campaign will unlock the Stasis Subclass. This alone is a compelling reason to pick up the DLC, especially if you are a Warlock or Hunter main. Stasis grants you access to a slew of new powers related to freezing your enemies. A stasis weapon like Agar Scepter is really good by itself, but running it alongside a Stasis Subclass takes it to a whole other level. You can lock down an army of enemies all the while feeding yourself ability energy. I think Stasis is the most fun as a Warlock. The super is ridiculous. Just point in the general direction of your enemy and the freezy balls will hunt them down. If you are ever lonely, you can make your own little Stasis buddy to peek around corners. Hunter is a lot of fun with Stasis too. The Stasis Tornado Super has been nerfed quite a bit from where it originally started. It's still very effective in PvE and can be effective in PvP for hurting your opponents. I especially like running the Mask of Bacchus exotic that turns your dodge into a flash stab. Sadly, Stasis Titan is my least favorite. I don't like the slow floaty melee attack, and I don't like the Slam and Bash super. As far as I'm concerned, Strand Titan does everything Stasis Titan does, but better. The only times I find myself running Stasis Titan is when I'm trying to synergize with a Stasis weapon build. Even though I don't enjoy using it, I will say that it is very effective at clearing a wave of enemies. To close out this video, I'll just reiterate what I stated in the introduction. You'll probably want to wait on a sale for this one. Beyond Light is $29.99 normally, and that is just way too much for legacy content. There are sales all throughout the year, usually around some of the major holidays. I think it is a good DLC and it's worth playing. I just think it should be closer to $10 as opposed to $30.